quote in one of the editorials in the paper, and the editorial was really talking about our country, and it was a political thing a little bit, but when it hit me, when I read this quote, it hit me hard, and it didn't hit me like a staggering, man, this is terrible, but it hit me in that this is why things are like they are. And this quote is from a man, his name is Alexis de, I'm going to pronounce it, he's French, Tocqueville, I think. But he's famous for the quote, when he came to America to study American democracy and why America was doing so well. And this was his quote. It's not the one I'm going to read because I never read this other one. But his quote about America at the time, this was a while ago. I think early 20th century, about 100 years ago. This was his quote. He said, "America is great because America is good. When America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great." And he was struggling because he was French, and in France they were having all kinds of problems. They had democracy, but it wasn't working well, and they were having all kinds of problems. So he came to America to see what was going on in America, and he came, and one of the things that really impressed him and caused him to make that statement was that when he came, he would go on a Sunday morning and walk through the areas where he was in, and the churches were packed out. They were full. And he observed how people were living, and he said that America is great because America is good. Because at the time, America was really a very spiritual nation, and there was a great outpouring, and people were serious about their walk with the Lord. And as I said, the churches were packed out, overflowing. But this was his quote about his own country and his observation. And I'm going to read it in two parts. I'm going to read part of the quote in the beginning and then part at the end. And this was his observation of why there was such a struggle in France. And after I read it, connect it, this would describe, I believe, most of America thinking today. This quote says, "They owe nothing to any man. They expect nothing from any man. They acquire the habit of always considering themselves as standing alone. And they are apt to imagine that their whole destiny is in their own hands." I read that, and I took a breath, and I read it again, and I'm going to read it again. Just let this sink in, of this mentality, and if this mentality has started to creep into your thinking and your actions. Hopefully not, but really it's a good time to just say, have I allowed the culture, because I believe this is what our culture believes, have I allowed the culture to influence me in this thinking? They owe nothing to any man. They expect nothing from any man. They acquire the habit of always considering themselves as standing alone, and they are apt to imagine that their whole destiny is in their own hands. This was his observation about his fellow countrymen and what the problem was with his country. This philosophy, this way of thinking is so unbiblical, but it's so intoxicating. It hit me because I looked and I said, this explains how people can justify doing what they do, but even more important, not doing what they don't do. And the first biblical reference it made me think of, we're not going to turn there, but the first biblical reference was the Good Samaritan. If you have a mentality, I owe nothing to anyone, and I don't expect anything from anyone, that justifies walking past a man who's been beaten in the knee and laying on the ground, right? Even if you're a priest, because wasn't it the priest, one of the first men to walk by? And he was able to justify a man in great need. Probably if nobody ever would have come along, he probably would have died right there on the road. And he was able to justify it with that kind of thinking. I owe nothing to him because I expect nothing from him. And it's the idea that when I think like that, I can ignore people and needs and situations all the time. Let's see what it says about trusting in ourselves, because this is what that part of that quote is talking about. To trust in ourselves is foolishness. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 17. This is what the Lord says. Cursed are those who put their trust in mere humans and turn their hearts away from the Lord. They are like stunted shrubs in the desert with no hope for the future. They will live in the barren wilderness on the salty flats where no one lives. But blessed are those who trust in the Lord and have made the Lord their hope and confidence. They are like trees planted along a riverbank with roots that reach deep into the water. Such trees are not bothered by the heat or worried by long months of drought. Their leaves stay green and they go right on producing delicious fruit. The human heart is most deceitful. This is the part that's very well known. The human heart is most deceitful and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is? But I know. I, the Lord, search all hearts and examine secret motives. I give all people their due rewards according to what their actions deserve. See, that's the foolishness here of just thinking of self. Of saying, I don't expect anything from you, so don't expect anything from me. I have no debt to you, and I'm not requiring anything from you. Let's go to 2 Corinthians. One more verse here on 2 Corinthians 1, 8 and 9. I think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and completely overwhelmed, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. But as a result, we learned not to rely on ourselves, but on God who can raise the dead. See, that's the difference between the humanistic, secular type of thinking and the belief that we're supposed to have. Now, I'm going to ask you the question, which is the title, Do we owe Jesus anything? That's the title of my message. So what I've said so far, contemplate that question. Do we owe Jesus anything? And here Paul is saying he went through such difficulty, and it literally, this wasn't just a figurative thing, he literally was saying we expected to die. Some people believe he actually experienced death and was brought back to life. But either way, it was ferocious, it was horrendous, and it was terrible, and they expected to die. But he said, but as a result, the good thing that came out of it, because God turns all things to good to those who love him, right? The good thing that came out of it, he said, was we learned not to rely on ourselves. Think of that Samaritan story. Think of the Jews and how much they hated Jesus telling that story. Because the man who helped them, the man who ignored them was one of their own. The man who helped them was their mortal enemy. Okay, let's go to point number 2. All of mankind has an enemy that's real, and mostly it's under the radar in our life. Let's go to Luke chapter 10. When the 72 disciples returned, they joyfully reported to him, Lord, even the demons obey us when we use your name. Yes, he told them, I saw Satan falling from heaven as a flash of lightning. And I have given you authority over all the power of the enemy, and you can walk among snakes and scorpions and crush them. Nothing will injure you. But don't rejoice just because evil spirits obey you. Rejoice because your names are registered as citizens of heaven. The thing about following the Lord is he gives us power. He gives us abilities to do amazing things. A lot of times we underplay them, but he gives us all this power. But he said, don't rejoice in what I do through you. Rejoice that I do through you. Rejoice that you have salvation and you're one of mine. The devil is always fighting against us. And where does the devil try to pull us? He doesn't try to pull us into being Satanists. He's not trying to get us to be at some rally where they're sacrificing people and doing mystic things. He tries to pull us away from each other and pull us away from God. And the devil, he doesn't do it in blatant ways most of the time. He does it in very subtle ways to work at, to help us grow weary, to try to get us discouraged. It's under the radar. We often don't recognize it. It's Satan behind things. Situations and circumstances and people. If we were able to spiritually see what's going on, when that person says that thing to us, we would be able to just be patient with that person. I believe that's one of the ways Jesus operated and was able to do what he could do. He saw behind the person and what was really pushing the buttons to get that person to do that thing. Point number 3. There's no accomplishing anything without being led by God in it. Let's go to John chapter 15. John chapter 15, verses 5 through 8. Yes, I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Don't forget that line. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Anyone who parts from me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile to be burned. But if you stay joined to me and my words remain in you, you may ask any request you like and it will be granted. My true disciples produce much fruit. This brings great glory to my Father. Let's also go to Philippians 4:13. Philippians 4:13. For I can do everything with the help of Christ who gives me the strength I need. So if we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, then wouldn't it be true that we can do nothing without the strength of God? Amen. The world and God use very different measuring instruments. One of the things we want to do to make sure, as we ask this question, do we owe Jesus anything, that we truly are thinking, I owe men. I owe God and I owe man. I'm skipping ahead a little because that's point number 4, but I owe God and I owe man. When we have that kind of thought process, we got to make sure we're not using the instruments the world measures things by. Because the way the world measures, those guys who walked past the man who was beaten and laying on the side of the road, they were justified. They had good reasons. If you remember the parable, they said why they couldn't stop. They had more important things to do than to worry about one man lying at the side of the road. But the Samaritan man, who wasn't even a follower of God, he got it. He saw there's a man in need. I have the ability to help him, so I'm stopping everything. And when we read the parable and know the parable, he did it at a cost. He gave his money, he gave his time, he could have been late for his business meeting. All those things, he gave it at his cost. But he saw that need was greater than his own personal things. And he was willing to stop and do that. The measuring instrument the world uses of success will take us off of the path, and it'll really take us, and I think it's where most people live today. And you could ask many Christians, and if they were honest, I bet this theory or this philosophy would be something, even if they haven't bought totally into it, they buy partially into it. They owe nothing to any man. They expect nothing from any man. We shouldn't expect from other people. It's one of the things that gets us in trouble. When I expect from you and you don't come through like I expect, now all of a sudden there's offense. There's a problem. Much offense comes because I'm expecting people to be like I want them to be. But we can expect from God. So when someone disappoints us, we go to God. Lord, help me to have patience. Help me not to jump to a conclusion of why this happened. Help that person if there is something they're struggling with that caused them to say this or do this or treat me like this. Point 4. We're almost done. Rest of the quote. This makes every man forget his ancestors, and it hides his descendants, and separates him from his contemporaries. That means he's all alone. His past he's forgotten. It's saying his descendants, everything having to do with who he is and where he is, how he got there, is erased from his mind, and separates from his contemporaries means that even those around him, those his age, those he works with, those his friends, everybody, says it causes them to separate. When you think like that, little by little you separate. It throws him back forever upon himself alone, and threatens in the end to confine him entirely within the solitude of his own heart. You know how many people end up at the end of their life in this place? They may not be alone physically. There may be some people around them. But there's no relationship. There's no real relationship with any of them. You know how many people die without real relationship with other people? Way too many. One of the things, the reasons God, I believe, had me sell insurance to senior citizens was to show me and teach me a lot of lessons. Because I was young when I started. I was in my 20s. I probably stopped selling insurance somewhere in my 30s, maybe early 40s. But he showed me a lot of things. And when I was out, because all we did, we had appointments, I would go into their kitchen, mostly their kitchen. We'd sit at their kitchen table. You know how many people are honest with you at a kitchen table? It might take a couple minutes, but there's something about sitting at the kitchen table with people that brings out what's really in their heart. And one of the things I did in selling insurance is I went in there not only to sell insurance if I could, but to minister to people. So we would sit at the table and I would ask questions and I would listen to what they were saying. Or sometimes I would ask one question, they would talk for 15 minutes and pour their heart out. But as I got to know people, what I found is there are so many people that get to the end of their life that have totally separated themselves. Maybe they had some relationships at work, but they don't work anymore. Maybe they had relationships with their children, but many of them would tell me they did not have one, and some of them had a bunch of children, not one of them was a good relationship. You know how many older people I had who told me the only time my kids call me or come to see me is when they want something from me. That's not a relationship. But then my question to myself, I didn't ask them that, why is it like this? And I believe that because real relationship takes a lot of work and it takes sacrifice. You can't have a good relationship with anybody over a period of time without overcoming some things that were difficult in the relationship. It's impossible. Parent, child, brother, sister, husband, wife. There's going to be difficulties in the relationship that you have to overcome. And when you're not willing to do that, when you separate yourself out, when you get to a point, because it comes across, whether you literally say it or you don't, it comes across, I don't want anything from you, don't expect anything from me. When that comes across, people are going to separate themselves out and be lonely and alone. His observation of his nation, and I would say if he was still alive and came back and observed America in this day and age, he would say, this is just like France was when I was alive. If I believe I owe nothing to anyone else because I expect nothing from anyone else, I am doomed. So the question, do we owe Jesus anything? This is the answer right here. Romans 13, 8-10. Pay all your debts except the debt of love for others. You can never finish paying that. If you love your neighbor, you will fulfill all the requirements of God's law. For the commandments against adultery and murder and stealing and coveting and any other commandment are all summed up in this one commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to anyone. Love does no wrong to anyone. So love satisfies all of God's requirements. So when we understand, yes, we do owe Jesus. Salvation is free, but once we're saved, it says we have a debt. And it's a debt we never can fulfill. But the nice thing is he gave the story of the guy who owed, I think in our day's money, it was multi-millions of dollars. And he forgave him that debt and let him go. So that's us. But we owe him. It's not that it's required for salvation. What do we owe him for salvation? Nothing. He did it all. It was a gift he gave us. We owe him nothing for salvation. But when we're saved and we're a child of his and we confess that we're following him, we owe him. There was somebody I was talking to today about, they asked me what I was teaching on. I told them. And they said, yeah, it's like the expression, waste our life for Jesus. Because you know what the world would say? If you sat down with somebody who totally does not understand the Word of God and doesn't understand God's ways, and you told them, this is what I do. When I had a family, 3-4 kids, and I was working insurance, and we could work 4 days a week. But I was talking with my pastor, and we were getting involved with Teen Challenge, and he said, they really need people to help. Would you consider doing that? And I said, sure. But it meant I had to take off a day, and it was total commission job. So instead of working 4 days a week, I worked 3 days a week. So you know what that meant? 25%, right? You went from 4 days a week to 3 days a week. So I volunteered for Teen Challenge, and every Friday, instead of going and selling insurance, I would go and help Teen Challenge. I did whatever they wanted, and it took us on a journey to even have our own ministry for years, but working with men. And you know what? I get my W-2, well, it wasn't a W-2 because we were independent contractors, but I get my statement at the end of the year, I think 1099. I made as much as I did working 4 days. Because God doesn't check. When you have the, and not only that, when you really serve the Lord and you sacrifice and you follow him, your ability to be content with less is far greater. One of the things that causes discontentment is when we're striving so much to get material and things that we lose the idea of sacrificing and helping others. And when that starts to go by the wayside, you can have twice as much and be less content. Because in sacrifice and helping others, all of a sudden I'm helping these guys at Teen Challenge my life seemed great. I mean, their lives were such a struggle, and all of them at a point, you know, obviously we're going through some serious things. That's why they were in Teen Challenge. And so I'm looking at my life and I'm saying, man, this is a great life I got. Because sacrifice and helping others helps to give us perspective. When you step into those places of helping disabled people, or helping people who are dying, or helping, I mean, there's so many of us in here who do all kinds of things for people. And like I said, some of it's under the radar. We don't even know all of what each of us does in sacrificing for other people. But as we do that, it just helps to put our life in perspective and to really see how good God is to us and through us. Okay, let's stand.